Jamal Williams grew up in the forgotten corners of Chicago, where opportunity was as scarce as winter warmth. A tall, slender black youth with intelligent eyes that missed nothing, Jamal learned early that the system wasn't built for boys who looked like him. His Nigerian father had abandoned the family when Jamal was 8, leaving behind only stories of ancestral wealth and royal lineage that seemed like fairy tales against the backdrop of their decaying apartment complex. By 17, Jamal had mastered the art of survival. He watched how people moved, how they spoke, how they signaled belonging to worlds he could only glimpse from the outside. His first hustle began with stolen credit cards, not taken by force, but through careful observation at the luxury mall where he mopped floors after school. The wealthy shoppers, many of whom were white executives who barely acknowledged his existence, would carelessly leave their wallets exposed, PIN numbers entered without shielding the keypad. "They don't see us," his friend Marcus would say. A stocky black teenager with a genius for technology, Marcus taught Jamal how to clone cards. To them, we're just part of the furniture. When Jamal was caught using a stolen card, Officer Terrence Johnson, a black policeman with 20 years on the force, gave him a choice instead of jail. "You're too smart for this petty stuff, son. Either get educated or get locked up next time." Something about the man's disappointment stung more than anger would have. That night, surrounded by his mother's nursing textbooks, Jamal found a memoir written by a Ghanaian businessman detailing the customs and etiquette of African high society. He devoured it, then sought more, books on economics, geopolitics, international finance. The local library became his university. When his mother, Esther Williams, a hardworking Kenyan immigrant who pulled double shifts as a nurse's aide, caught him studying instead of sleeping, she sat beside him with tears in her eyes. "Your mind is your inheritance," she whispered. "Your grandfather was an educated man in Nairobi before the troubles came." By 20, Jamal had perfected a new dialect, an accent that blended West African cadences with British colonial precision. He practiced in front of mirrors, cultivating a regal bearing that commanded attention. His taste in clothes evolved, second-hand designer pieces altered to perfect fit, creating an illusion of bespoke tailoring. The final piece came from an unexpected place. An elderly black professor named Dr. Kwame Osei, whom Jamal met while catering a university function, took an interest in the curious young man who asked such perceptive questions about international commodities markets. The Ghanaian academic never suspected that his casual mentorship provided the last ingredients for an elaborate confidence game. When Jamal disappeared from Chicago, he left behind his past and his name. His mother received only a cryptic note: "I'm going to build our kingdom, Mama. Trust me." In his place emerged Prince Adebayo Oladipo of Ife province, scion of an ancient royal house and bearer of mineral rights to untapped oil reserves that would make investors wealthy beyond imagination, all for the small price of initial development capital. The prince had arrived. The game had begun. New York embraced Prince Adebayo Oladipo with the enthusiasm it reserves for exotic new money. Jamal, now fully embodying his royal persona, established his beachhead at the Pierre Hotel, paying for 2 weeks with cloned cards that would buy him time to land bigger fish. Every detail of his performance was flawless, from the custom-made Igbata robes in vibrant patterns to the antique ceremonial ring he claimed had belonged to 7 generations of Ife royalty. The ring was actually pawn jewelry, reshaped by Marcus's cousin, Kofi, a black Senegalese craftsman who worked for a jeweler in the Diamond District. "This better work," Kofi had warned, admiring his own craftsmanship. "Because if it doesn't, we're all going down together." The prince's first target was Vanessa Carmichael, a white socialite whose family fortune came from South African mining interests. At a charity gala for African children's education, the perfect hunting ground, Jamal deployed his carefully constructed biography. "In my homeland," he told her, accepting a glass of champagne with the precise balance of appreciation and entitlement, "we believe that wealth without purpose becomes a burden to the soul." His African accent was impeccable, his knowledge of continental politics nuanced. Vanessa was captivated, especially when he mentioned the untapped oil reserves. My family has kept this blessing hidden until we could find partners who would respect our land and people, he explained. Previous companies wanted to exploit, not collaborate. Within a week, Vanessa introduced him to her circle, old money and new tech wealth, all hungry for exclusive opportunities. Among them was Darius Knight, one of the few black hedge fund managers on Wall Street, whose cautious interest worried Jamal. Knight asked technical questions about extraction methods and environmental impact assessments that required increasingly elaborate lies. To solidify his credibility, Jamal hired Amara Diallo, a black graduate student from Guinea studying at Columbia, as his cultural attaché. Unaware of the con, Amara provided authentic details about West African royal protocols that made the prince's story unassailable. Her genuine warmth and intelligence also gave the operation a legitimacy it desperately needed. "Your Highness has such vision for sustainable development," she would say, her admiration real even if its object was not. The prince established Ife Heritage Holdings, complete with glossy prospectuses showing satellite images of the supposed oil fields, actually manipulated geological survey data purchased from a Russian hacker. For investors to access this opportunity, an initial capitalization of $50,000 secured one unit, with returns projected at 15 times investment within 18 months. Vanessa bought 10 units. Her friends followed suit. Within a month, Jamal had collected over $2 million in development funds, all flowing through offshore accounts created with identities manufactured by Marcus, who remained in Chicago managing the technical side. As money flowed in, Jamal expanded his operation. He rented offices in a prestigious building, hired a small staff of unsuspecting employees, all black professionals who believed they were working for an African royal's legitimate business, and began hosting investment dinners where he would perform traditional ceremonies he had learned from YouTube videos. But wealth changed something in Jamal. The role began to feel less like a performance and more like a birthright. He found himself genuinely interested in West African development, spending hours researching actual opportunities. Sometimes, looking out over the Manhattan skyline from his hotel suite, he would forget that Prince Adebayo was fiction. Maybe, he whispered to his reflection one evening, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit, the lie can become truth. What he didn't know was that among his new investors was someone who had spent decades separating truth from fiction, and who had already begun dismantling the prince's carefully constructed identity. 6 months into the operation, Prince Adebayo had become a minor celebrity in New York's elite circles. Jamal now controlled nearly $15 million in investor funds, kept a permanent suite at the Pierre, and had been featured in a Bloomberg article about emerging African business leaders. The con had grown so large that it required constant management and increasingly elaborate explanations for why the oil development was taking longer than expected. Traditional land ceremonies must be completed before we break ground, he explained at a tense investor meeting, distributing elaborate ceremonial tokens, actually tourist crafts mass-produced in Kenya, that he claimed represented their ancestral partnership. My people's traditions cannot be rushed by Western timetables. Most investors, already enchanted by returns on their initial paper investments, money Jamal simply redistributed from new investors, accepted these delays. But Harold Blackwood, a self-made black billionaire whose fortune came from telecommunications, had begun asking increasingly pointed questions. "That's interesting, Your Highness," Blackwood said during a private lunch, his Jamaican-American accent carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly how wealth worked. "Because I was just speaking with Nigeria's Minister of Petroleum Resources last week, and he mentioned nothing about new developments in the region you've described." Jamal felt a cold ripple of fear but maintained his composure. The minister would not be briefed on royal family holdings, Mr. Blackwood. These arrangements predate colonial boundaries. Blackwood merely smiled and changed the subject, but Jamal knew he had a problem. He instructed Marcus to create digital evidence of the fictional province's special status, which required hacking into government databases, a significant escalation of their crimes. Meanwhile, Amara had begun assembling inconsistencies in the prince's stories. With her genuine background in West African studies, she noticed when he mixed cultural details from different regions. When confronted, Jamal convinced her these were unique to his royal lineage's specific traditions, and even promoted her to Vice President of Cultural Affairs with a substantial salary increase. "My family's ways are sometimes unique," he told her, capturing her eyes with an intensity that wasn't entirely feigned. Over months of working together, his admiration for her intelligence and integrity had evolved into genuine feelings, complicated by the knowledge that everything she admired about him was false. The scheme's expanding requirements forced Jamal to bring in more accomplices. He recruited his cousin Jerome, a black American chef who had studied in Lagos, to create authentic meals for investor events. He hired Taiwo and Kehinde Adeyemi, twin brothers from Lagos who had been struggling actors in Los Angeles, to play his royal guards and advisors. "This is getting too big," Marcus warned during one of their encrypted calls. "We need to cash out now." But Jamal couldn't stop. The respect he received as Prince Adebayo had become addictive. For the first time in his life, powerful people looked him in the eye, valued his opinions, invited him into rooms where decisions were made. The black staff he'd hired were thriving under his leadership, receiving opportunities they'd been denied elsewhere. "Just a few more months," Jamal insisted. "We're on the verge of the biggest score yet." That score was the International Resource Development Fund, a $500 million investment vehicle targeting emerging markets. If he could secure even a portion of that fund, they could all disappear with enough money to last lifetimes. To win the fund's backing, Jamal announced a royal visit to the supposed oil fields. He would take select investors, including representatives from the fund, to witness the preparations firsthand. This would require his most elaborate deception yet, creating a fake royal compound and drilling operation in Ghana, which would stand in for his fictional province. As he made these plans, Harold Blackwood was conducting his own investigation, piecing together the prince's true identity through facial recognition software, financial forensics, and old-fashioned detective work. He discovered connections to Chicago, the stolen credit cards, and eventually, Jamal's real identity. Rather than expose the fraud immediately, Blackwood decided to join the upcoming trip to Africa. He wanted to understand why a young man with such obvious intelligence and charisma had chosen this path, and perhaps, to offer an alternative. What neither man knew was that Amara had made her own discovery, a photograph in an academic journal showing a Nigerian cultural event where none of the traditional practices matched those the prince had described. Her loyalty was about to be tested against her commitment to truth. As private jets were chartered and preparations finalized for the African excursion, three separate forces converged toward a reckoning that would change all their lives forever. The Ghana operation represented Jamal's masterpiece of deception. Using $3 million of investor funds, he leased land outside Accra, constructed a Potemkin village of development equipment, and hired local workers to pose as his loyal subjects. He arranged for government officials, actually paid actors, to greet his delegation with elaborate ceremonies. Even Marcus was impressed by the scale of the illusion when he arrived from Chicago to manage the technical aspects. "You've lost your mind," Marcus whispered as they inspected the fake drilling operation the night before investors arrived. "This isn't a con anymore, it's a movie production." The delegation included representatives from the International Resource Development Fund, Vanessa Carmichael, several other key investors, and Harold Blackwood, whose presence made Jamal increasingly uneasy. Amara came as cultural liaison, her growing doubts hidden behind professional courtesy. For 2 days, the charade proceeded flawlessly. Investors were shown carefully staged drilling tests, met with fake tribal elders, actually respected local actors from Ghana's theater community, and attended elaborate ceremonies where they were given sacred blessings for the partnership. The black Ghanaian performers, believing they were participating in a cultural exchange program sponsored by a neighboring country's royalty, brought authentic emotion to their performances. Chief among these performers was Kwabena Mensah, an elderly farmer whom Jamal had cast as the village elder. His natural dignity and commanding presence lent credibility to the entire operation. "This man reminds me of my grandfather," Jamal confided to Amara during one ceremony. The comment wasn't scripted, and the unexpected honesty in his voice surprised them both. On the third night, during a feast under the stars, Blackwood requested a private meeting with the prince. In a specially prepared royal tent, Jamal received him with practiced grace, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured traditional palm wine. "This is quite an operation you've built, Mr. Williams," Blackwood said quietly. The use of his real name froze Jamal mid-pour. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. "How long have you known?" Jamal asked, his royal accent slipping away. "Since before I invested my first dollar," Blackwood replied. "I was curious to see how far you could take it. I must say, you've exceeded expectations." Instead of threatening exposure, Blackwood made an unexpected offer. He slid a folder across the table containing incorporation papers for a legitimate African development firm with Jamal listed as CEO. "You have real talent," Blackwood said. "Instead of fake oil, develop real resources. Instead of stealing from investors, create actual value." He tapped the folder. "I'm prepared to fund this company legitimately, with you at the helm, under your real name." Before Jamal could respond, Amara entered the tent, her face set in grim determination. She held up her phone displaying an academic article about Nigerian royal traditions that contradicted everything the prince had claimed. "Who are you really?" she demanded, tears of betrayal forming in her eyes. The confrontation might have ended there if not for a sudden commotion outside. Marcus burst into the tent, panic evident on his face. "The locals have figured out we're running a scam," he said. "Someone translated what we were telling the investors. They're calling the authorities." As the fabricated world collapsed around them, Jamal made a split-second decision. He rushed not toward escape, but toward the village gathering where confused investors mingled with increasingly hostile local workers. Standing before them all, black and white, victims and accomplices, he removed his ceremonial robes. "My name is Jamal Williams," he announced, his natural voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I am not a prince. There is no oil. I have deceived you all." The confession, shocking in its directness, stunned everyone into silence. In that moment of truth, something unexpected happened. Instead of running, Jamal began to explain why: the systemic barriers, the invisible walls, the desire to be seen as valuable in a world that had taught him his only worth was what he could take, not what he could build. As security forces approached in the distance, the fate of the false prince hung in the balance. Whether judgment or redemption awaited him remained to be seen. 3 years later, Jamal Williams sat in a modest office in Accra, reviewing quarterly projections for Williams Development Partners. The plaque on his desk, a gift from Harold Blackwood, bore a simple inscription: "The truth has its own power." The aftermath of his confession had been both brutal and transformative. Most investors pressed charges, resulting in a 16-month sentence in a Ghanaian prison, a considerably lighter punishment than he would have faced in America, largely due to Blackwood's influence with local authorities and his argument that restitution would be impossible if Jamal received the maximum sentence. Amara, whose testimony could have destroyed him completely, instead advocated for rehabilitation over retribution. "He created an illusion that many wanted to believe," she told the court. "The responsibility doesn't rest entirely on his shoulders." Prison changed Jamal. Stripped of pretense, he found himself sharing a cell with Kwasi Ofosu, a black Ghanaian former government official imprisoned for exposing corruption. Through their long conversations, Jamal gained a genuine understanding of African economic challenges that no book could have provided. "The real tragedy," Kwasi would say, "is that your fake development project could have been real, creating jobs and opportunity instead of just taking." Upon his release, Jamal found Blackwood waiting. The billionaire's offer still stood, though with stricter oversight and the condition that Jamal would spend years repaying his victims from his legitimate earnings. "Second chances must be earned daily," Blackwood reminded him. The new venture focused on sustainable agricultural technology for small-scale black African farmers. Many who had been hired as actors in Jamal's charade became his first legitimate employees, including Kwabena Mensah, who now served as community liaison. The elderly Ghanaian man's forgiveness had been harder to earn than any investor's. "You played with our dignity," Kwabena had said during their first post-prison meeting. "Now you must help restore it through honest work." Marcus eventually joined the company after serving his own shorter sentence, his technical skills redirected toward developing mobile apps that connected farmers with markets. "Never thought I'd be using my powers for good," he joked during late nights at the office. Turns out it's actually more challenging than crime. Perhaps most surprisingly, Amara returned as well. Their reunion had been tentative, months of rebuilding trust through letters while Jamal was incarcerated. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you," she admitted during their first project meeting. "But I believe in the work we're doing." Their professional relationship slowly evolved into cautious friendship, with the possibility of something more remaining unspoken between them. The company became a kind of family, bound by the shared experience of deception transformed into purpose. Jamal's mother, Esther, came to visit, bringing with her the books that had started his journey. Seeing her son leading team meetings with Black African engineers, farmers, and developers, she recognized that he had found a kingdom after all, not one of inherited privilege, but of created value. On rare occasions, usually after long days of work, Jamal would find himself slipping momentarily into his old accent, a ghost of Prince Adebayo emerging in his speech. These moments no longer brought pleasure but served as reminders of the thin line between reinvention and deception. Harold Blackwood, now his mentor and board chairman, had explained it best: the difference between a con man and an entrepreneur is that one extracts value while the other creates it. The skills can be similar, but the legacy is worlds apart. As evening fell over Accra, Jamal walked through a demonstration farm where his company was testing drought-resistant crops. Workers greeted him by name, his real name, with respect earned through consistent action rather than manufactured prestige. In the distance, he could see the lights of the city beginning to twinkle, real possibilities in a world that no longer needed his illusions. The prince was gone, but in his place stood a man finally building something true. The best con, Jamal thought to himself, watching black farmers examine the healthy crops with pride, is no con at all.